All right, let's jump into one of the most, well, fascinating and maybe even challenging books in the entire biblical library, Daniel. The source material we're looking at argues this isn't just a collection of old stories. Nope, it's a book that gets right in your face and forces you to make a choice.
You see, the book of Daniel kind of has this dual reputation. On the one hand, you've got these stories that everybody knows, right? The lion's den, the fiery furnace, even that famous phrase, the writing is on the wall. But on the other hand, it hits you with these really tough, unsettling questions. Questions about whether the Bible is human or divine, whether God is actually in control of history, and whether we're even allowed to stay neutral on any of it.
And that right there, that brings us to the core argument from our source. The book of Daniel is intentionally built to stop you from just sitting on the fence. It is designed to make you choose a side.
So what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it means you can't just walk away with this comfortable, easy view of the Bible as just a bunch of human stories with some nice religious ideas sprinkled on top. The book itself, by its very structure, just completely rejects that middle-of-the-road approach.
So what Daniel does is it puts a really stark choice in front of you. It's either exactly what it claims to be, a divinely inspired text from God, or you have to find a way to explain it all away, to dismiss its most radical claims. According to our source, there's just no comfortable in-between.
Okay, so what is it about this book that creates such a dilemma? Well, our source points to one thing above everything else: the prophecies, and specifically the absolutely mind-blowing prophecies you find in Daniel chapter 11.
And listen, we're not talking about some vague Nostradamus-style predictions here. No way. We're talking about Daniel 11 containing something like 200 incredibly specific historical details. I mean, names, military campaigns, political backstabbing, all of it written down centuries before any of it actually happened.
Now that kind of shocking accuracy leaves you with really only two possible explanations. Option 1, this is divine revelation. God himself revealed the future. Or option 2, it's a forgery. Somebody wrote it all down after it happened and just pretended it was a prediction. There's really no third option on the table.
And you know, this whole thing perfectly highlights what our source calls the modern dilemma. We have this tendency today to want to admire the Bible, right? We want to keep its moral teachings, respect its history, but we also want to cut out the supernatural stuff. Let's take the ethics, sure, but leave behind the God who actually intervenes in history. Daniel, with its impossible-to-ignore prophecies, just totally exposes that as a huge contradiction.
Okay, so with that really heavy choice just hanging in the air, let's shift gears a little and turn to the first half of the book. These are the famous stories we all know, and our source frames them as these incredible lessons in how to live faithfully when you're in exile, when you're far from home and you have zero power.
And just look at how deliberately this book is put together. It's fascinating. The first 6 chapters are stories about Daniel. They focus on how to be faithful right here, right now. And they're written mostly in Aramaic, which was the international language of the day. It was meant for everybody. But then, the last 6 chapters, those are visions by Daniel, focusing on God's future plans. And they're written in Hebrew for God's own people. It's just a brilliant 2-part structure.
And what's so important to see here is that Daniel's incredible faith didn't just appear out of nowhere in the lion's den. His very first test was a private one. It was a disciplined choice he made about the food he would eat. It was that small act of integrity, done when no one was watching, that built the kind of character that could later stand up to kings and, yes, lions.
And then you get the story of Daniel's 3 friends in that fiery furnace. I mean, their response when the king threatens to execute them is one of the most powerful statements of faith you'll ever read. It's this absolute trust in God's power to save them, but also a total submission to his will, even if he doesn't. That right there, that's the heart of real courage.
And it's not just the good guys who are learning lessons here. You've got King Nebuchadnezzar, literally the most powerful man on the planet, who has this dream about a giant tree being chopped down. Daniel's interpretation is just brutally honest. You, O king, are that tree. And sure enough, the king is humbled. He's even driven into madness for 7 years, until he finally gets it, until he acknowledges that God, not him, is the one who truly rules the kingdoms of men.
So then, the second half of the book, it makes this big shift. We move from these personal stories of faith to these epic, sweeping visions of all of world history. And here, that theme of God's complete control over nations really takes center stage.
This all comes to a head in another one of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, this time of a giant statue, and Daniel interprets it as a timeline of future world empires. The head of gold, that's Babylon. It's replaced by the silver chest of Medo-Persia.
After that comes the bronze thighs of Greece, then the iron legs of Rome, and finally a future divided kingdom of iron and clay. It's just this breathtaking map of history, laid out hundreds of years in advance.
But the message here is so much more than just, hey, look, I can predict the future. It's a profound statement about how the world works. The rise and fall of the world's greatest empires, they're not just historical accidents. They're not just the result of human ambition. They are all operating according to a divine plan.
So let's bring this all home. Why does this ancient book, with all its strange dreams and foreign kings, why does it matter to us today? Well, our source would argue that its message is actually more relevant now than ever before.
So what are the big takeaways? Daniel is basically a handbook for how to live with integrity when you're not the one in power. It's about how to be God's people when you're living in a culture that doesn't share your values. And most importantly, it shows us a God who doesn't just watch history from a distance, he writes it. And that means, ultimately, that no life, not mine, not yours, is truly autonomous.
And this gets to the real heart of the issue, doesn't it? The argument is that the reason people struggle with Daniel isn't really the miracles or even the prophecies. It's the implication. Because if God really does govern the rise and fall of nations, well, then that same God has total authority over our individual lives too.
And so we end up right back where we started. The book of Daniel, ancient, mysterious, and completely uncompromising, stands before us. And according to our source, it quietly but firmly gives us its challenge. It doesn't offer a comfortable middle ground. It just says, you must choose.